Iva wanted me to talk about civil society and what forms of civil society are emerging now. And to start off with, he wanted me to talk about civics in the past. I think the idea of civil society in the 80s, I always argued that in spite of the plethora of organizations that South Africa had in the 80s, these weren't civil society formations in the classical sense of the word. Civil society, I think, emerged as an expression of wanting to expand democracy by people all over the world. And those people wanted to expand democracy in an environment in which democratic objectives were being won at a national level, i.e. people could vote for governments they wanted to vote for, and people could hold those governments to account in a variety of forms. Beyond that, I think people wanted to create spaces of expressions of people in civil society. So civil society was never conceived as an opposite pole of the state. It was conceived within the broad ambit of the state, but expanding democratic participation within that. The organizations that were formed in the 80s and the huge and large number of organizations there were in South Africa went about that. Those organizations aimed fundamentally to recreate the state. They didn't accept that the state that was in place at the time, and I think the problems that we see today in civil society in South Africa hark back to that past. Because we didn't have civil society institutions whose business was to expand democracy that already existed, there is this relationship which is not quite emerging between organizations that continue to view themselves as civil society organizations and the state. And that relationship is not a relationship that is emerging into a relationship that would expand the space for participation by people outside of the state, but within the broad penumbra of the state, if you see what I'm trying to get at. What we instead have are a handful of very powerful organizations allied to the ruling party that completely dominate that space, and dominate it to the extent that it's just not possible for institutions that genuinely represent local interest, that represent interest that of perhaps marginal people. Those organizations aren't able to emerge and expand democracy in South Africa. I think COSATU so dominates the civil society space, and the relationship between COSATU and the ANC is absolutely important in this regard. It has imposed on civil society organizations a particular way of relating to the state, which is just not helpful. And that is, I think, evident in the many strikes that we see. Almost 20 years after South Africa went beyond apartheid, it's still not possible for people to express their dissent by not going on strike, if this is what they prefer to do. And I think the governing party has had something to do, a huge amount to do with how civil society relations have developed. One, the ANC dominates the state, and the manner in which it has managed the state, it has fashioned that state to relate to people, has, I think, given rise to several things which I think are problematic. The degree to which the state penetrates society is on the retreat. It is limited. More and more, the state is being driven back. It simply can't inform how people respond to their own circumstances and how they relate to the state. It's going to be difficult to do all of those things. And the reason it's going to be difficult is because it doesn't seem, when you look at our arrangements in political society, that the extent of suppression of dissent at a political level is as profound as it is in civil society.